The Girl and the Alien by Frank Gullo. Gianna raised her sword and faced the creature before her. The Waron was a hybrid of lizard and mammal, and the monster retained the deadliest characteristics of both species. A fusion of scale and fur and tooth and claw. No one had ever faced a Waron alone before, but that didn't frighten Gianna. She wanted to prove that she could single-handedly defeat this foe. Advancing with a rakish grin, Gianna swung her sword in a vicious overhead arc. The Waron howled and drew back, seemingly in great pain. Amazed at her good fortune, Gianna aggressively charged forward. It was a mistake. Because, as Gianna quickly found out when the creature sprang out of a defensive crouch, the Waron had been feigning injury. Off balance, Gianna tried to shift her shield in front of her to deflect the charging form. But it was too late. The beast's reflexes were as swift as its appearance was intimidating, and it took only a heartbeat for the Waron to sidestep the clumsy defense and counter with a clawed blow to Gianna's torso. Gianna felt her insides burn up as the air rushed out of her lungs. Falling backward, she lost her balance and her head slammed into the hard rock of the cavern floor. The impact knocked her sword from her hand. The sound of the weapon feebly clattering against a nearby stalagmite reverberated through the cavern, a prelude to her defeat. Gianna could only raise her head an inch, just enough to see the Waron hissing and spitting venom, advancing towards its fallen prey. "That's enough hollow games for today," said Gianna's father, pulling the neural jack from his daughter's head. "Aw, Dad, just another hour. I've got to get by that Waron." Gianna's father was a gentle and friendly man, but he looked troubled as he held his daughter's key to holographic virtual reality. "Gianna, you've been playing this all afternoon. You know you have to eat supper and get ready for tonight. Kala's very excited to meet you." Gianna shook her head and focused on the neural jack in her father's hands. "I told you I don't want to go. Who wants to see a stupid lava fall? I just don't like cranons." Gianna's father laid a hand on his daughter's shoulder and peered down with a bit of a disappointed look. He had a way of doing that, of enforcing discipline and making everything relaxed with a simple gesture. But this was different. Gianna instinctively knew that her father meant well, but she couldn't change her feelings. Not about this. She hated Cranar. She had for as long as she remembered. The planet was too cold in the winter, and you'd never stop sweating in the summer. On top of that, all the food tasted like tofu, and the Hollow games were at least a year behind the new releases on Earth. Plus, there were only a handful of other human teens her age at First Colony. And then there were the Cranons, the orange, furried, monkey-like indigenous inhabitants of the world. They were nothing like humans. All of their cities were crowded and filled with crime, and they were dirty and lazy. The only thing they were good at was sports. If it wasn't for Derby Ball, they would all be in prison. It was no wonder Earth had to send her father as a special ambassador to straighten the place up. Still, Gianna knew that her father loved her and only wanted her to feel comfortable in her new home. Thinking about her father made Gianna feel guilty for spending so much time playing Hollow games. She supposed she could put up with a lava fall and a cranon for a few hours for her father's sake. "Okay, Dad, I'll go." Her father grinned and handed back Gianna's neurojack. "Good, I know you'll like the lava fall. That interactive Hollow tour you took in school doesn't do it justice, and just give Kala a chance. You'll find she's a lot like you." Gianna waited until her father had turned to leave and then rolled her eyes at the comparison. Herself like a cranon? As if she skipped classes and got in fights during gym. Perhaps sensing his daughter's ritualistic scorn, Gianna's father paused in the doorway and turned around. "By the way, what game has the Waron in it?" Gianna shook her head and exhaled, inwardly relieved that her father hadn't noticed her contemptuous gesture. Worlds of peril. Warons are the level 4 gatekeepers. I just can't get by them. Her father raised an eyebrow. Maybe you should switch from one-player mode, get yourself another gamer. Not me, boasted Gianna. We'll see, her father replied. Sunset on Cranar was a sight few humans could forget. At the end of each day, it was as if the planet's twin suns, upon their descent below the horizon, for one instant merged to form an incredible luminous megastar before fading to darkness. Sunsets were the only thing Gianna liked about Cranar. All set? It was Gianna's father, coming up behind her from the house. Gianna turned and glanced down the driveway at her father's hover car, filled with camping equipment and occupied by 2 Cranons. Biting down on a grimace, Gianna said, "Sure." It turned out that 4 of them would be going into the rainforest on First Colony to see the lava fall. Gianna, her father, Kala, and an adult Cranon Gianna didn't recognize. Gianna's father quickly made introductions. "Gianna, this is Fozi Necron, a statesman of First Colony. He's in charge of restructuring the city's economy." The Cranon lumbered forward and smiled, his powerful furry arms extending down well past his knees. Focusing on the elongated, pointed teeth, Gianna wondered if it was really a smile. It looked more like a snarl. "A pleasure to meet you, young human." The Cranon's voice grated on Gianna, and she made sure the few possessions in her pockets were still there after she shook hands with the alien. Gianna then turned her attention to Kala. The Cranon youth was about 30 years old by human count, but Gianna's father had explained that even though Kala's age was high, in reality she was at the same 13-year-old maturity level as Gianna. Gianna winced when she thought of that. Kala sure didn't look like a teenager. The alien looked dangerous, sneaky, and dishonest, just like the Cranons she always watched getting arrested on the news. "Hello, Gianna." The friendly tone surprised Gianna, and she could only mumble a short greeting in response. Seeing that everyone had become acquainted, Gianna's father started the hover car, and the trip was in motion. "So, your family's from Italy?" "What?" Gianna turned, surprised at the question. Kala looked at her expectantly, interested. Yes, my father was born in Milan. My mother's from New York, though. That's a different part of Earth, in America." "Yes," Kala nodded. "I've been studying Earth history, and we're reading about Italy and the Roman Empire. Very fascinating people." Gianna beamed, feeling an inner pride at the mention of her Italian heritage. If Kala had read about Italy and the Roman Empire, maybe she wasn't like other Cranons. "Still," Kala continued, "unfortunate that in later history, Mussolini was no better than the enemy he fought." Gianna didn't respond to that. It was true that Benito Mussolini had been an autocratic dictator, but who was Kala to judge a human? Didn't most Cranons belong to rival clans that constantly fought each other? As if Italy was ever that bad, even under Mussolini. Perhaps sensing Gianna's irritation, Kala glanced down and pulled a digipad out of her waist pouch. She flickered on the device and began checking her messages. Just as well, Gianna thought, looking out the window to her right and relishing the opportunity to avoid conversing with the Cranon. The sights of First Colony, especially the outskirts, easily confirmed Gianna's suspicion of Cranar, and made her wonder why she'd even considered that Kala might be different from other Cranons. Everywhere she looked, there were decaying buildings, numerous poor and destitute, and the all-too-common criminal-looking aliens. The Cranons just didn't want to help themselves. Of course, Gianna's father had told her that this view was wrong, that Cranons were at heart a race with just as much potential as humans. It was just that they lacked the raw materials to forge an adequate planetary infrastructure. Gianna had shrugged when she heard her father talk that way. What did complicated words have to do with people not wanting to improve their lives? The ride out to the rainforest took about an hour, and Gianna first sensed there would be trouble when she spotted the looming crimson cloud in the pale blue sky. She heard Necron gasp and guessed the elder Cranon had spotted the cloud as well. "What is it?" Gianna's father asked. Necron rubbed a hand through his fur. "Very rare. Not good. A Bushati storm. We must immediately return to first." A violent glow in the sky, followed by a flash of lightning, and then the hovercar began shaking wildly. To Gianna, it felt like an earthquake. She dimly heard Necron's jumbled explanation. "The storm pellets cause explosions. Strike the ground." Gianna grew frightened. This wasn't like Hollow games, where you could just shut the game off when you were in trouble. She looked around desperately for any form of assurance and focused on Kala. "What do we do?" The alien seemed composed, but from the way she tightly braced against her seat harness, Gianna guessed that she was scared too. "I don't know. Maybe we can wait it out." As if in response, the hovercar settled for a minute, long enough for everyone to catch their breaths. But another wave of pellets hit, this time crashing more powerful tremors and ruptures that flipped the hovercar over. Gianna's seat harness snapped, and she was flung into Kala and then tumbled into the rear of the vehicle. The hovercar's emergency systems came online and a safety partition slammed down, effectively separating Gianna and Kala from the two adults. Airbags mushroomed out, cushioning the blows of impact. Gianna heard cries of pain and concern from the front, but she could make out no words. Kala was already disengaging herself from her seat harness and moving into action. Quickly, the Cranon youth kicked out the hovercar's rear door. Gianna was stunned. She knew Cranons were strong, but she never thought they were that powerful. She had always thought that they were just fast and good at catching passes in derby ball. "Gianna, come on now. Move it, human," said Kala suddenly, grabbing Gianna by the arm. Too nervous to protest, Gianna numbly followed Kala out of the vehicle and onto rainforest soil. She immediately noticed that the tremor caused by the Bushati storm pellets had sent the hover car to the edge of a chasm. The car's rear end swayed perilously on the precipice. Kiala motioned to the chasm's edge. "I felt the car tipping over and realized we had to get out. Our weight was too much. The car's more stable now, but it still could tip over. We have to do something." Gianna held back tears. "But what about my father? Where's he? And where's Necron?" "The door locks must be jammed. It's up to us to get them out." Gianna peered around. The chasm was over 10 meters across and kilometers deep. Another tremor hit, and Gianna was sent sprawling. "What are we going to do?" she screamed. Kiala's eyes narrowed, and she said, "Stay calm. You see those trees over there, across the chasm? Those long branch-like tentacles hanging to the ground?" Gianna nodded, observing an octopus-shaped tree. Kala continued, "Those vines are flexible, but as strong as your native steel. If we pick up a loose one and bring it over here, we should be able to tie it from the front of the car to a tree so they can get out without tipping over. I'll look for a place on the hover car to tie the vine. You go get it." Gianna nodded, but then saw the madness of the scheme. "It's over 10 meters, she cried. "We can't jump that." Kala's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? You can't jump that far?" The alien laughed and took off in a sprint. As she reached the edge of the chasm, she leapt high in the air, clearing the gap gracefully and easily. "Incredible," said Gianna, thinking aloud. "No human could have made that jump. Moments later, Kala waved to Gianna from the far side of the chasm. "I have it!" Gianna breathed deeply, relieved, as she watched Kala break into a run for the return jump. She felt the ground begin shaking in the wake of additional Bushati storm pellets. "Kala, wait!" But Gianna's warning was drowned out by the swirling cacophony of the storm. Kala still managed to clear the chasm, but when she landed on the quivering ground, the force of the pellet's quake immediately hurled her into the air, directly into a jutting boulder. The alien screamed as her knee collided against the unyielding rock. She screamed, "Kala!" Gianna ran forward. "Are you all right?" The alien was holding her knee, her hand stained with viscous azure fluid that Gianna suddenly realized was blood. The Cranon snarled in pain, but her feral gesture softened at Gianna's approach. "Gianna," she said, "take the vine. Tie it." Kala motioned weakly to the ropey vine. "But your knee!" Gianna couldn't stop focusing on the blue blood. She felt her throat tighten as she remembered all the times she'd been wounded in hollow games. She had to remind herself that Kala couldn't just take a healing potion and hop back to her feet. The expanding blue stain on Kala's orange pelt took her back to an interactive fantasy game she'd played last summer. One of the creatures she'd killed had looked just like a Cranon, just like Kala. Even the blood was the same blue color. But when Gianna had slain the creature, it hadn't shown the pain or fear that was clearly etched on Kala's face. Kala forced a smile, bringing Gianna back, and this time Gianna knew that the Cranon's facial expression wasn't a snarl. "I'll be fine. There's a med kit in the hover car. Go tie the vine and get it." Quickly, Gianna grabbed the vine and worked to tie the flexible material from the car to a nearby tree. The storm still raged, but the immediate danger was past. Gianna's father and Necron could now safely exit the hover car. Later, as she was looking down on the wave after wave of descending molten lava that made up the Cranar lava fall, Gianna turned to Kala with exposed guilt and gratitude on her face. "Earlier today, you saved my father's life. I never trusted or thought much of Cranons before. I guess I've been wrong." The alien shifted slowly, the recently administered inner knee brace slightly prohibiting her movements. "Hey, I've been wrong too. I didn't mean to laugh at you before. It's just that I was surprised. I mean, any Cranon could have made that jump. I must have forgot that you were human for a while there." Gianna nodded and thought of something to cover the awkward moment. She turned to Kala and smiled. "You ever play Worlds of Peril before?" "The Hollow game?" Kala chuckled. "A few times. Why?" "Well, there's this Waron.